Desmond. I'd like to share my worship journey with you. It's a testimony of how I came to worship God so freely, not only in my heart, but also on the keyboard. I've always considered myself somebody who loves music, but I never thought of myself as someone who could create music. I always felt that I was only somebody who could listen and sing. But I remember when I got saved, I started looking around for a church, somewhere where I can call my home. And I started looking around in Windhoek. And I visited, then it was still called Every Nation, His People. And I walked in, I came a little bit late. And when I walked in, I found them already in the middle of worship, quite in the height of it. And I looked on stage and I saw people worshiping. They looked like me, they were younger than me, but they were worshiping with so much excellence and so much heart, so much passion. And I remember taking two decisions that day. One was a good decision, one was a bad decision. I decided that this is my home. I decided that this is where I will worship and this is where I will build a spiritual family. That was the good one. The bad decision I made that day was I decided in myself that I could never be like those people on the stage. I just discounted myself. Fast forward around 2 years, I got married and I moved to the coast, and we started a Connect group in Swakopmund. So the Connect group was taking long to get off the ground. Although we had a few people coming every week, it was very difficult to get them to open, very difficult to get them to buy into what we were trying to do. So we communicated to our church in Windhoek to say that maybe we need help. And they sent somebody, they sent Annette. And Annette came and she led that Connect group one day. She didn't do anything extraordinarily special, but she did do one thing different to us, is that she came with a keyboard. And although she wasn't an accomplished piano player then, she asked if she could play some music before we start praying. And we allowed her, and she whipped out her keyboard, she plugged it in, and she just played one chord, a C major chord. I didn't know what it was by then, but it just went. That's all she did. And then she started praying and playing. And something in that room just shifted that day. I can't really explain it, but all of a sudden, the very walls that were up in people's heart, they just came crumbling down. People that we have been worshiping with and fellowshipping with for 6 to 7, 8 weeks, all of a sudden were really bearing their hearts in worship and in prayer. And I learned something that day. I learned that, one, worship breaks walls. And since that day, I play worship in my home or wherever I work, but I also realized that I need to start learning an instrument. At the time, I was just doing it to sort of maintain that level in our Connect group. But I know that God had other plans. It was just the beginning for me. So we were living in Swakopmund and we couldn't buy a keyboard, so I asked my friend to send a keyboard over to us. I sent him some money and he sent it over. I didn't know anybody who could give keyboard classes, and it was such a blessing in disguise because I realized that I have to start learning on YouTube. And so I started. It took about 2 weeks of just praying and looking, and I think that probably taught me my first lesson, is that when looking, you need to find somebody who teaches systematically, who can teach you from scratch, from nothing to everything. And I found a certain gentleman and I started learning on YouTube, just 20 minutes a day, every day, just learning techniques, learning theory, and learning also the heart of worship. That the three are very important. And as I was learning, I realized my body was complaining. My fingers were rebelling. They didn't want to do the things that my lessons were telling me to. And not only that, my mind was also rebelling. It was giving me a lot of frustration. It kept telling me that this is not for you. Remember, you're not someone who can make music. You're supposed to listen and sing. But I just persevered. And slowly but surely, I saw that my body began to just give way to what the Spirit was doing. And it wasn't anything, I would say, supernatural, although it was. It didn't look anything like a divine gift that came from heaven. It was really God just encouraging me on a daily basis, just through diligence and through time, to just carry on playing in private before more than I play in public. And that was so important. And so I started playing, and I started seeing how as I started learning my skill, that it was easier for the Spirit to take over, because now you're no longer thinking about the techniques. You start thinking about what God is doing in the heavenlies and starting to bring that out on an instrument. So I started learning, and I started playing with my small connect group. That was about 2 years. We moved back to Windhoek, and I thought, well, that's it for me and my journey with music, because I felt that we had already such a terrific worship team in the main church. And remember what I said, I had discounted myself. It was an inner vow, actually. It was an inner vow that set a limitation for myself. So they called some auditions for worship, and I went. I was not so keen on going, but Emily, my wife, really encouraged me, and I just went and I played, some basic chords. I could just play, which is just really some basic chords. And I was so surprised when they called me back and said that I can join the team. So I've learned in the past couple of years that for some people that's a negative answer, or that's not what they wanted to hear. But for me, for them to just say, come and sit under somebody, and you're not going to be on stage yet, you're just going to learn, come to practice and learn. For me, that was unbelievable. I was over the moon because of the limitation I had set myself. And it was so mind-boggling for me. And on that day, the Lord told me something that I still carry to this day. And all He said is, I'm proud of you. And me being the performer, I thought that He meant, I'm proud that you have learned keyboard, and I'm proud of your skill. But he was not proud of that. He was proud of the fact that I stretched myself to take new territory against what I have spoken over myself, and I actually broke something very huge in the Spirit that day, and that has carried me till today. So although I strive definitely to be excellent and to learn and to practice before every single Sunday and to make sure my heart is correct, although I do that, I also know that whether how it sounds or how worship goes that day, whether somebody's off key or whether there's a baby crying or whether the sound is not, or the media is not working well, or the lyrics, it doesn't faze me, because God is proud of me. He's the one who has affirmed me to be on the stage. So with that was the first really big base or foundation that I started building my journey in worship. And I started just learning more, 20 minutes every single day without fail, learning a new skill. You don't have to take big steps, but you have to take a lot of little steps consistently. And it's not a maybe or if, it will happen. It will happen. So I started growing, and eventually I was assigned to a team. And we had my first Sunday on worship. And it's almost like everything I learned about the heart of worship went away. That first Sunday where I was on, because I was asked to intro a song, and I got so nervous, and I went back into that performance mindset of trying to be excellent, trying to not sound bad, trying to not make the church look bad, but to be honest, trying to not make myself look bad. And I went into so much detail and practice about doing this thing so perfectly. And my time came to intro a song, and normally when the piano intros, it's around the 4th song of the worship set, so it's really at the height of worship, where the church is already at really another place of worship. And all I had to do was intro from something that sounded like this was just a C chord into a minor. So now if I knew that now, I would have just taken my time. I'd have relied much more on what God is telling me to do and not so much about what I'm supposed to do. And so my time came and I was on the sea and I forgot what to play. And everything went quiet for a while. And people opened up their eyes and saw what is happening on stage. And I remember thinking that this is the worst thing that could happen to me, and surely God is going to come down and smite me. But I looked across the stage, and Mark was leading that day, and he looked over at me. He was not worried, he was not fazed. He just said 2 words. He just said, "Start again." That's all he said. And I could start again. And although it may seem like that was a bad day, it taught me something so important. And that is, regardless of skill or regardless of how bad you think it will be, if God has affirmed you and if your heart is in the correct place and you are worshiping for the correct reason, not to sound good, not to make anybody look good, then the world will not end if you make a mistake on stage. And it's really about just constantly learning and putting yourself out there and growing. So that was a very big day for me, and it really released me to be able to try new things on stage, not to look good and not to show how much I've been practicing, but just to replicate what heaven is doing. Even though I don't know how it will come out, how it will sound, I have that affirmation not only from God, but from my leaders, my fellow worship team, that they know that my heart is in the right place. And so I started learning and taking new strides in my gifting. Started correcting my heart, making sure that I'm not worshiping for anybody else but God Himself. But in the same breath, I started making sure that I'm practicing, making sure that my heart is correct as I'm worshiping. And I think my story is probably everybody's story, because it may not be worship or instrument, it may be anything else. But I have learned that God has actually placed everything that is required for a seed to grow. He's placed it inside of the seed. And yes, maybe you do need some sunlight or some water like a seed to grow. Maybe you do need practice. You do need support. You do need leadership and covering. But in truth, if God has told you to do something, and not necessarily or audibly, anything that is written in Scripture, God has given you the capacity to carry out. And all you need to do is just correct your heart, or put your heart in the right place, and really listen to what the Lord is telling you, and follow suit, and just to be diligent. I think music is something that's very close to God. It's very close to His heart, and I take it so seriously. But with that said, I really have to want to encourage anybody listening to just really follow what the Lord is saying, and not look too much at yourself, because that will lead you to stumble. And I think my story is one of many.